The dream was in her hands, a boarding pass to the Rhode Island School of Design, and a sketchbook that held her soul. The nightmare started with one man's venomous sneer. For 17-year-old Amara, the bustling airport terminal became a stage for a brutal public humiliation, orchestrated by a security officer drunk on the tiny taste of power his uniform provided. He tore apart her belongings, mocked her art as if it were contraband, and branded her a threat for all to see. He thought he was demonstrating his authority. What he didn't know was that 30,000 feet above, Amara's father was already turning his private jet around. The real lesson in power was about to begin, and it was moments from landing with the full force of a billionaire's fury. Before we begin, comment where you are watching from today and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Now let's get into it. John F. Kennedy International Airport was a universe unto itself, a swirling galaxy of languages, emotions, and destinations, all humming under the constant, impartial gaze of the departures board. For Amara Jenkins, it was the threshold to her future. At 17, she possessed a quiet confidence that flowed from her fingertips onto the pages of the worn, leather-bound sketchbook she carried everywhere. Inside were not just drawings but worlds, fantastical cityscapes, intricate portraits that captured the souls of strangers, and designs for clothing that flowed with impossible grace. This sketchbook was her passport, and the ticket in her other hand for American Airlines Flight 1412 to Providence was the visa. She'd earned this. Countless late nights, sacrificed weekends, and a portfolio that had made the admissions board at RISD's summer intensive program sit up and take notice. Her father, Julian, had wanted to fly her there on his jet, but Amara had insisted on going commercial. She wanted to feel like a regular student, to arrive with the same flutter of nervous excitement as everyone else, not to be the girl who stepped off a private plane. It was a small act of independence, a rite of passage she craved. Her father had finally relented, his warm, deep voice full of pride. "All right, my little eagle. Fly on your own wings. Just call me the second you land." Amara smiled at the memory as she approached the gate for her flight. The controlled chaos of the terminal was invigorating. She found a seat near the window, pulled out her sketchbook, and began to draw the sweeping wing of the Boeing 737 parked outside, losing herself in the familiar comfort of lines and shading. "Boarding for Groups 1 and 2 will now commence." A tinny voice crackled over the PA system. Amara, holding a Group 3 ticket, continued to sketch, waiting for her turn. She was so absorbed in capturing the precise curvature of a turbine engine that she almost missed the next announcement. "We are now boarding Groups 3 and 4. Closing her sketchbook, she stood and joined the queue, a pleasant thrum of anticipation in her chest. The line moved slowly. When she finally reached the podium, she handed her boarding pass and ID to the gate agent, a woman in her late 40s named Brenda, whose name tag was pinned slightly askew on her navy blue uniform. Brenda glanced at the ticket, then at Amara, then back at the ticket. A small, unpleasant frown tightened her lips. "Your carry-on," she said, her voice flat. She gestured to Amara's small rolling suitcase and her backpack, which held her sketchbook and laptop. "You need to consolidate. Only one carry-on and one personal item." Amara blinked. "This is a backpack and a suitcase, that's standard." "The backpack is too large to be considered a personal item. It's a second carry-on," Brenda stated, her tone implying Amara was either stupid or trying to pull a fast one. "You'll need to check the suitcase." "But boarding has already started. They told me at the check-in desk it was fine," Amara explained calmly, though a knot of anxiety was beginning to form in her stomach. Other passengers were starting to stare. "The check-in desk isn't here, I am," Brenda said, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on the counter. "Step aside and let other people board. You can go back to the ticketing counter and pay to check the bag." "The flight will be gone by then," Amara pleaded, her voice rising slightly. "Can't I just gate check it here, please?" Brenda let out an exaggerated sigh. "Fine, but it'll be $50. She looked Amara up and down, her gaze lingering on the teen's ripped jeans and paint-splattered hoodie. "If you can afford it." The condescension in her voice was a physical slap. Amara felt a hot flush of embarrassment and anger creep up her neck. She was about to reach for her wallet when a man in a crisp TSA uniform stepped forward. He had been observing the interaction from a few feet away, a look of sour boredom on his face. "Is there a problem here, Brenda?" he asked, though his eyes were fixed on Amara. "This passenger is holding up the line with an oversized bag and a bad attitude," Brenda reported, her voice taking on a martyred tone. The officer's name tag read Miller. He was a man of medium height and build, but he carried himself with an air of inflated importance. He turned his full attention to Amara, and the bored look was replaced by one of predatory interest. "What's your name, miss?" he asked, his voice a low drawl that was meant to be intimidating. "Amara Jenkins." "Amara Jenkins," he repeated slowly, tasting the name. "And what seems to be the issue? Can't follow the airline's rules?" "There is no issue," Amara said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "The agent said my backpack was too big. I was just surprised because I've flown with it many times." Officer Miller smirked. "Well, today's your lucky day. You get a lesson in airport regulations." He gestured for her to step out of the line completely. "Come with me. We need to have a little chat." The knot in Amara's stomach tightened into a cold ball of dread. This wasn't about a backpack anymore. She could feel it. As he led her away from the gate and the murmuring line of passengers, she felt dozens of pairs of eyes on her back, painting her as a problem, a disruption, a criminal. Her dream, which had been so bright and clear just moments before, was starting to look very far away. Officer Miller led Amara not to a quiet corner for a simple bag check, but to a sterile, gray-walled area just off the main concourse, designated for secondary screenings. The area was conspicuously public, separated from the bustling terminal by only a half wall of frosted glass. It was a stage, and Miller was its self-appointed director. "All right, Amara Jenkins," he began, snapping on a pair of blue latex gloves with a loud, theatrical snap. "Let's see what we've got here. Place all your belongings on the table, slowly." His tone was laced with a venomous insinuation that struck Amara to her core. She was a 17-year-old artist on her way to an art program, not a smuggler. Yet, under his accusatory gaze, she felt a profound sense of guilt, as if she had done something terribly wrong. With trembling hands, she placed her small suitcase on the stainless steel table, followed by her backpack. "Suitcase first," he commanded. He unzipped it with a rough tug and began rummaging through her neatly folded clothes, pulling out jeans, sweaters, and t-shirts and tossing them unceremoniously onto the table. He picked up a pair of her underwear with the tips of his gloved fingers, holding it up for a moment with a disdainful sneer before dropping it. The act was so gratuitously demeaning that Amara had to bite her lip to keep from crying out. She could feel the stares of passers-by, their curiosity turning to pity or suspicion. "Nothing in here," he announced loudly, as if he had expected to find a hidden cache of contraband. "Now for the backpack." Amara's heart pounded against her ribs. Her backpack was her sanctuary. It held her laptop, her expensive drawing pencils, and most importantly, her sketchbook, the repository of her dreams and her soul. Miller unzipped the main compartment and pulled out her MacBook, turning it over and over as if it were a strange artifact. "Expensive laptop for a kid," he muttered, more to himself than to her. He then plunged his hand back in and his fingers closed around the leather-bound sketchbook. He pulled it out and held it up. "What's this? Some kind of diary?" "It's my sketchbook," Amara said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's for my art program." A cruel smile played on Miller's lips. "An artist," he said, drawing the word out mockingly. He opened the book, his grimy gloves a desecration against the clean white paper. His eyes, devoid of any appreciation for art or beauty, scanned her intricate drawings. He saw a detailed sketch of an elderly man she'd seen on the subway, his face a roadmap of a long life. He saw a design for a dress inspired by the architecture of a forgotten temple. He saw a portrait of her father, capturing not just his likeness but the deep love and strength in his eyes. Miller scoffed. He flipped through the pages dismissively, his rough handling threatening to tear the delicate paper. He stopped at a page filled with charcoal studies of human hands in various positions. "Looks suspicious to me," he declared, his voice booming in the open space. "Strange symbols and codes." "They're just hands," Amara protested, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and fury. "I'm practicing anatomy, for drawing." "That's what they all say," Miller shot back, his authority swelling with every head that turned to watch the drama unfold. He held the book up for Brenda, the gate agent, who had drifted over to enjoy the show. "See this? Could be gang signs. You never know these days." Brenda gasped theatrically, playing her part. "Oh my goodness, you have to be so careful." The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on Amara, stealing the air from her lungs. This man was twisting the most precious parts of her identity into something ugly and threatening. He wasn't just searching her bag, he was violating her spirit. An older woman in the boarding line, seeing the girl's distress, stepped forward. "Excuse me, officer," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "She's just a child. This seems incredibly excessive. It's clearly just a drawing book." Miller wheeled on her, his face contorted with rage at being challenged. "Ma'am, this is a TSA security matter. Are you attempting to interfere with a federal officer in the performance of his duties? Because I can have you detained as well." The woman, chastened and intimidated, retreated back into the line, casting a helpless, apologetic look at Amara. The small spark of hope she had offered was extinguished, leaving Amara feeling more alone than ever. A college-aged kid standing nearby, however, was less easily intimidated. He discreetly raised his phone, angling it to get a clear shot of Miller, the girl, and the open sketchbook. The injustice was too blatant to ignore. He hit record. Miller, high on his power trip, turned back to Amara. He took her sketchbook, her pencils, her laptop, and her phone, placing them in a separate gray bin. "I'm confiscating these items pending further investigation," he announced. "And you are being detained for questioning. You're a potential security risk." He gestured towards a small, windowless room behind the screening area. "In there. Now." The words hit her like a physical blow. Detained. Security risk. They were turning her dream trip into a nightmare. All because a man with a badge had decided to use his power to bully a teenage girl who looked different from him. As she walked towards the interrogation room on legs that felt like jelly, she could feel the weight of every suspicious glance, every whisper. Officer Miller had succeeded. He had stripped her of her dignity and painted her as a threat, all before a captive audience in the middle of JFK. The interrogation room was small, cold, and smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee. It contained nothing but a metal table and 3 chairs bolted to the floor. The door clicked shut behind her, a sound of grim finality that echoed in the sudden, oppressive silence. The vibrant energy of the airport was gone, replaced by a suffocating stillness. Amara sat in one of the chairs, wrapping her arms around herself, trying to fight back the tears that burned behind her eyes. Officer Miller entered a moment later, carrying her sketchbook. He tossed it onto the table with a clatter that made her flinch. He was joined by another man, older and broader, with a salt and pepper mustache and a name tag that read Supervisor Thorne. Thorne's expression was one of weary annoyance, as if this was just another piece of irritating paperwork he had to get through. "So, Miller," Thorne began, not even looking at Amara. "What's the story here?" "Subject was causing a disturbance at the gate," Miller reported, his voice dripping with self-importance. "Refused to comply with airline baggage policies, became belligerent. A search of her belongings revealed suspicious materials." He tapped the sketchbook. "Possible coded messages, gang-related insignia. I felt a more thorough interview was warranted to assess the threat level." Amara's jaw dropped. The lies were so blatant, so audacious that for a moment she was too stunned to speak. Belligerent? Coded messages? "That's not true," she finally managed to say, her voice trembling but clear. "None of that is true. The gate agent was rude about my bag, and he—" She gestured at Miller. "He dragged me over here and made things up. Those are just my drawings." Thorne finally deigned to look at her, his eyes cold and dismissive. "Miss, Officer Miller is a trained federal agent. Are you accusing him of fabricating a report?" "Yes," Amara said, her courage surging past her fear. "That's exactly what I'm accusing him of." Miller chuckled, a low, nasty sound. "See? Belligerent, uncooperative." He leaned forward, his face close to hers. "Let's start from the beginning, Amara. Who are you traveling with? Who are you meeting in Providence? Who do you work for?" The questions were rapid fire, designed to confuse and intimidate. "I'm traveling alone. I'm going to a summer art program at the Rhode Island School of Design. I don't work for anyone. I'm a student," she answered, trying to keep her story straight and simple because it was the truth. "RISD, huh?" Miller sneered. "That's a fancy, expensive school. How does someone like you afford a ticket to a place like that?" The implication was ugly and clear. Someone like you. It hung in the air, thick and poisonous. "My father is paying for it," she said through gritted teeth. "And who is this father?" Thorne interjected, picking up a pen and a form. "What's his name?" "Julian Jenkins." "And his occupation?" "He's in technology," Amara said vaguely, not wanting to give them any more than she had to. Miller laughed out loud. "He's in technology. Is that what they're calling it these days? Does he fix computers at the local library?" The degradation was relentless. Every word was a small paper cut, designed to make her bleed out her composure and self-worth. Amara thought of her father, a man who had built an empire from nothing, a man who commanded respect in boardrooms around the world, who had taught her to be strong and proud. The thought of him gave her a sliver of strength. "I'm 17 years old. I'm not a security threat. I'm a student. You have no right to keep me here. My flight is going to leave," she stated, looking directly at Supervisor Thorne, appealing to the senior officer's sense of reason. Thorne, however, just sighed. He was content to let Miller run his little power play. It was easier than contradicting his subordinate and dealing with the subsequent complaint. "We have every right, young lady," Thorne said wearily. "We can hold you for as long as we deem necessary to ensure the safety of the other passengers. Now cooperate with Officer Miller's questions, and maybe you can make the next flight." The hope of making her flight was gone. The injustice of it all was a bitter pill in her throat. She had done nothing wrong. Her only crime, it seemed, was existing in a way that offended Officer Miller's narrow worldview. "You get one phone call," Miller said with a malicious grin, pushing the landline phone on the table towards her. "Better make it a good one. Call Mommy or Daddy to come pick you up." Amara's hands shook as she picked up the receiver. There was only one person to call. She knew his number by heart. She punched in the digits, her heart hammering with a desperate plea. "Please pick up. Please, Dad." The phone rang once, twice, and then his voice, calm and familiar, came on the line. "Amara, you're calling from a landline. Is everything okay, sweetheart?" Tears finally welled in her eyes, hot and stinging. "No, Dad," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It's not okay. I'm at JFK. They pulled me out of the boarding line. A TSA agent. He's keeping me in a room. He says I'm a security risk. He took my sketchbook." She could hear the change in his voice instantly. The warmth was replaced by a sheath of ice-cold steel. There was no panic, only a terrifying, focused calm. "Listen to me very carefully, Amara. What is the name of the officer?" She glanced at Miller's tag. "Miller, Officer Miller." "Okay, put him on the phone." Amara held the receiver out to Miller. "My dad wants to talk to you." Miller rolled his eyes and snatched the phone from her. "Yeah, this is Officer Miller. Who is this?" he said into the receiver with puffed-up arrogance. He listened for a moment, his smirk firmly in place. Then the smirk began to falter. His eyes widened slightly. His posture straightened. "Sir, this is an active security situation. No, I can't just—" "Sir, with all due respect, you don't understand the protocols." He fell silent again, listening. His face, which had been flushed with power, was rapidly losing its color. He looked over at Supervisor Thorne, a flicker of panic in his eyes. "Yes, sir," he finally said, his voice now several octaves higher and stripped of all its earlier bravado. "I understand, yes, immediately." He hung up the phone, placing it back on the cradle with a hand that was visibly shaking. "What is it?" Thorne asked, annoyed. "Who was that?" Miller swallowed hard. He said not to let her go anywhere," he stammered. "He said he's 5 minutes out." Thorne frowned. 5 minutes out from where? The parking lot? Miller shook his head, looking towards the closed door as if he could see through it, to the sky beyond. "No," he whispered, a new kind of fear dawning on his face. "He said he's on final approach." In the sterile confines of the control tower at JFK, the atmosphere was one of practiced, unruffled professionalism. Controllers sat before their glowing screens, their voices a calm, steady ballet of instructions that guided metallic giants through the invisible highways of the sky. It was a normal Tuesday afternoon until a priority call patched through from the New York TRACON, the Radar Approach Control Center. "JFK Tower, this is Liberty Approach. We have a priority inbound. Ethereum 1, a Gulfstream G700 squawking 7,700, requesting immediate, unscheduled landing on runway 31L. Owner is declaring an in-flight family emergency." A ripple of tension went through the tower. A G700 was a top-of-the-line, ultra-long-range business jet, the kind owned by billionaires and heads of state. Ethereum 1 was the call sign for the corporate fleet of Ethereum Dynamics, the tech behemoth founded by the notoriously private and intensely driven Julian Jenkins. And squawking 7,700, the code for a general emergency, was a clear signal to part the waters. "Liberty, confirm Ethereum 1 is declaring an emergency?" the tower supervisor asked, his voice sharp. "Affirmative, tower. Pilot states the emergency is on the ground. He has been instructed to land with maximum expediency. He's 10 miles out, descending through 3,000. Instructions flew across the room. "Hold all departures on 31L. Vector American 112 to a holding pattern. Clear the runway. Get me the manifest for Ethereum 1, now." On the ground, Supervisor Thorne was getting a call from airport operations on his radio, his face growing paler with every word. He looked at Miller, who was now sweating profusely, and then at Amara, who sat quietly, unaware of the storm she was at the center of. "What in God's name did you do, Miller?" Thorne hissed, his voice a low, furious whisper. "I was following protocol," Miller insisted, his voice cracking. "She was suspicious." "Suspicious?" Thorne's voice dripped with scorn. "Did you run her name? Did you do anything other than play big shot in front of the passengers?" Before Miller could answer, the door to the interrogation room burst open. A harried-looking airport official in a suit, Marcus Cole, the Deputy Director of Port Authority Operations at JFK, rushed in. His eyes scanned the room, landing on Amara. "Is this her? Is this Amara Jenkins?" he demanded, his gaze frantic. Thorne stood up. "Yes, sir. We were just questioning her." "Are you out of your minds?" Cole exploded, his face red. "Do you have any idea who you just detained? Ethereum 1 just landed on 31L. It broke 3 FAA regulations on its approach to get here. We have a Gulfstream G700 sitting on the tarmac, and its owner is Julian Jenkins, and he is on his way here right now to get his daughter." The name landed in the small room with the force of a physical blow. Julian Jenkins, not just a man in technology. He was the man in technology, a titan of the industry, a visionary whose company held patents that were integral to nearly every piece of modern communication. His net worth was a number with too many commas to easily comprehend, and he was notoriously protective of his family's privacy. Miller looked like he was going to be physically ill. He slumped against the wall, his face the color of ash. He had picked a fight with a god of the modern world. From outside, a new commotion could be heard. Shouts, the sound of running feet. The door opened again, but this time, it wasn't an airport official. Standing in the doorway was Julian Jenkins. He was not a large man, but he filled the space with an aura of immense, compressed power. He was dressed in a simple dark gray sweater and slacks, clothes designed for comfort on a long flight, but he wore them with the authority of a king in his robes. His face was a mask of cold fury. His eyes, the same intelligent, perceptive eyes Amara had captured in her sketchbook, were locked on his daughter. He walked past the stunned airport officials and TSA agents as if they were nothing more than furniture. He knelt in front of Amara, his expression softening only when he looked at her. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice a low, controlled rumble. Amara could only nod, a single tear finally escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. Julian gently brushed it away. "It's over now." He stood up and turned to face the men in the room. His gaze swept over Marcus Cole, then Supervisor Thorne, and finally settled on Officer Miller. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. "You," Julian said, his voice quiet but carrying the chilling weight of absolute command. "You are Officer Miller." Miller, pinned by the billionaire's gaze, could only manage a pathetic, squeaking noise. "You took my daughter's belongings," Julian continued, his voice dangerously calm. "You locked her in this room. You accused her of being a criminal. You humiliated her." He took a step forward. "I want to hear you explain why." Behind him, two more figures appeared in the doorway. A woman in a razor-sharp business suit holding a tablet, his chief of staff, Evelyn, and the head of his personal security detail, a large, imposing man who looked like he could wrestle a bear and win. The stage was no longer Miller's. A far more powerful director had just arrived, and the final act was about to begin. The silence in the interrogation room was absolute, broken only by the frantic thumping of Officer Miller's own heart. Julian Jenkins' question hung in the air, not as an inquiry, but as a verdict waiting to be executed. Miller opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His mind, which had been so quick with snide remarks and baseless accusations, was a complete blank. He looked to Supervisor Thorne for help, but Thorne was staring at the floor, actively trying to become invisible. The airport director, Marcus Cole, stepped forward, his expression a practiced mask of deep concern and apology. "Mr. Jenkins," Cole began, his voice smooth and placating, "I am Marcus Cole, Deputy Director of Operations. On behalf of the Port Authority and the TSA at JFK, I want to offer my most sincere and profound apologies for this unacceptable misunderstanding." Julian didn't even glance at him. His eyes remained fixed on Miller. "I wasn't speaking to you," he said, his voice cutting through Cole's corporate pleasantries like a shard of glass. "I was speaking to him." He pointed a finger at Miller. "I want to hear his justification. I want him to look me in the eye and tell me what threat my 17-year-old daughter posed to the national security of the United States." Evelyn, his chief of staff, stepped forward silently and began recording on her tablet. The red dot of the camera was like a sniper's laser, aimed directly at Miller's crumbling composure. Miller swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Sir, we have protocols. Her bag was flagged by the gate agent. Her behavior was uncooperative." "Uncooperative?" Julian took another step closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper, which was somehow more terrifying than a shout. "Was she uncooperative when you rifled through her underwear in front of a crowd of strangers? Was she uncooperative when you mocked her art and called it gang signs? My daughter, who has more talent and integrity in her little finger than you have in your entire pathetic existence." Every word was a precision strike. It was clear he had been filled in on the details. Amara must have told him on the phone, or perhaps he had already seen the video. Leo, the student who had been filming, had uploaded it the moment Miller had dragged Amara into the room. It was already rocketing across social media, tagged with #JusticeForAmara and #JFKSame. "And you," Julian said, finally turning his glacial gaze to Supervisor Thorne. "You are his superior. You stood here and allowed this to happen. You validated his lies and intimidation. You are complicit in every single part of this." Thorne flinched as if struck. "Sir, I was simply trying to ascertain the facts." "The facts?" Julian's laugh was a short, sharp, ugly sound. The facts are that your officer engaged in a disgusting abuse of power, likely motivated by racial bias, and you did nothing to stop him. In fact, you enabled him." He turned back to Evelyn. "Evelyn, get our legal team on the phone. All of them. Get the CEO of American Airlines on the phone, and get me the head of the Transportation Security Administration in Washington. I want them all on a conference call in 10 minutes. He then looked at Marcus Cole. "Mr. Cole, you have 2 minutes to return every single one of my daughter's confiscated belongings to this table, including her sketchbook, completely unharmed. Then you will have these 2 officers' badges and credentials. They are not to set foot in this airport again, pending the full force of the lawsuit I am about to bring against every agency involved in this." Cole, seeing his career flashing before his eyes, nodded frantically. "Right away, Mr. Jenkins. Of course." He practically ran from the room, barking orders into his radio. Julian walked to the table and picked up Amara's sketchbook, which Miller had left there. He handled it with a reverence that was a stark contrast to Miller's earlier contempt. He opened it to the portrait Amara had drawn of him and looked at it for a long moment. He then turned to his daughter, his expression finally softening as he showed her the drawing. "He didn't break your spirit, did he, sweetheart?" Amara shook her head, a watery smile finally reaching her lips. "No, Dad, he didn't. Good girl." Within a minute, a flustered junior TSA agent scurried in and placed Amara's laptop, pencils, and phone on the table. Marcus Cole returned, holding Officer Miller's and Supervisor Thorne's ID badges in his hand like they were toxic materials. He placed them on the table. "They have been suspended, effective immediately, Mr. Jenkins," Cole said, his voice trembling slightly. "A full and thorough investigation will be launched." "An investigation?" Julian said, raising an eyebrow. "Oh, don't worry. I won't be leaving anything to chance. My investigation is just beginning." He looked at Miller and Thorne, who were standing frozen, stripped of their authority and dignity. "You two are going to become the textbook examples of what happens when you let a little bit of power rot your soul. You are going to be famous, but not in the way you ever wanted." He put a protective arm around Amara's shoulders. "Let's go, honey, we're leaving." As he guided her out of the room, past the stunned airport employees and the gathering crowd of onlookers, Amara took one last look back. She saw Officer Miller, the man who had tried to make her feel small and worthless, looking utterly broken. The power he had wielded so cruelly had turned on him, and the reckoning had been swift, total, and devastating. The walk from the interrogation room to the jet was a surreal experience for Amara. Her father's arm was a shield around her, his personal security detail parting the sea of onlookers like a human battering ram. Whispers and the flash of cell phone cameras followed them. But for the first time, Amara didn't feel like a spectacle of shame. She felt vindicated. The video Leo had posted was now a viral supernova, the story spreading with righteous fury across the internet. By the time they reached the private tarmac where the gleaming Gulfstream G700 waited, its engines humming softly, the world was already roaring on her behalf. Once inside the luxurious cabin, surrounded by soft cream leather and polished walnut, the adrenaline that had sustained Amara began to ebb away, leaving her feeling shaky and exhausted. Her father guided her to a seat and buckled her in, his movements gentle and reassuring. "Evelyn," Julian said, his voice back to its boardroom steel. "Get it done." Evelyn, already seated and typing furiously on her tablet, nodded without looking up. "Legal is drafting the initial complaint. It names Miller, Thorne, the TSA, and the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. We're filing for damages, but more importantly, we're petitioning for a court-mandated overhaul of their sensitivity and anti-bias training programs. I've already spoken to the press contacts at the Times and the Post. They're running with it for the morning editions. The CEO of American Airlines is on hold, ready to issue a public apology and offer you lifetime top-tier status for Amara. Reject it," Julian said curtly. "Tell him I don't want perks. I want him to publicly review his company's partnership with the security contractors at all major hubs. I want accountability, not a free bag of peanuts." The jet began to taxi, its powerful engines spooling up. Through the window, Amara could see the commercial terminal shrinking, a world of lines and rules and petty tyrants fading into the distance. The consequences for Officer Miller and Supervisor Thorne were not left to the slow, grinding wheels of bureaucracy. Julian Jenkins's influence acted as a powerful accelerant. Before their jet had even reached cruising altitude, the national head of the TSA had issued a public statement condemning the officer's actions and promising immediate and decisive action. For Miller, the unraveling was swift and brutal. His suspension became a termination within 24 hours. He was fired not for racism, which was hard to prove in a hearing, but for gross misconduct, falsification of a report, and conduct unbecoming of a federal officer. The viral video was undeniable proof. His union representative, after watching the clip, told him there was nothing he could do. Miller found his face plastered all over the news. He was doxxed online. People recognized him on the street, pointing and shouting. He had to deactivate his social media, but the damage was done. He tried to find other work in law enforcement, but no department would touch him. The name Miller was now synonymous with the arrogant abuse of power. The man who had sought to make a teenage girl feel powerless was now completely and utterly powerless himself. Within a few months, he was working a night shift as a security guard at a desolate warehouse complex, a bitter, forgotten man haunted by a 5-minute interaction that had incinerated his life. Brenda, the gate agent who had started it all, was also fired by American Airlines. The company, desperate to distance itself from the PR nightmare, cut her loose immediately. She complained to her friends that she had done nothing wrong, that she was just following the rules, but no one was sympathetic. Her casual cruelty had made her an accomplice, and she paid the price. Supervisor Thorne's fate was more nuanced, and in some ways more fitting. He wasn't fired. Julian's legal team made a specific recommendation, which the TSA, eager to placate the billionaire, accepted. Thorne was demoted. He was stripped of his supervisory role and reassigned. His new job was to oversee the development and implementation of the mandatory new national anti-bias training program, which the media quickly dubbed the Amara Initiative. Every day, Thorne had to sit in meetings and review materials that used the video of his own failure as a case study in what not to do. He was forced to spend the rest of his career confronting the very prejudice he had tacitly allowed, a constant, humiliating reminder of his inaction. The lawsuit proceeded, not as a quest for money, but as a lever for change. The Jenkins family's lawyers were relentless. They deposed dozens of employees, uncovered a pattern of similar complaints that had been buried, and forced the Port Authority and the TSA to agree to a landmark settlement. The terms were not financial. They were structural. The settlement mandated the creation of a new, independent civilian oversight committee at JFK, improved camera coverage in screening areas, and most importantly, the nationwide rollout of the Amara Initiative. Julian Jenkins had used his immense power not just to avenge his daughter, but to dismantle a small part of the system that had allowed her to be wronged. The karma wasn't just a simple eye for an eye. It was a cascading series of events that forced an entire institution to look in the mirror. The weeks following the incident at JFK were a whirlwind for Amara. She was no longer just an anonymous art student. She was a symbol. News outlets wanted to interview her. Activist groups wanted her to speak at rallies. Her social media was flooded with messages of support from people all over the world who had faced similar, smaller humiliations and had never been heard. Initially, the attention was overwhelming. She just wanted to go to RISD, to lose herself in her art. But sitting with her father in his quiet, minimalist office overlooking Central Park one evening, she realized something profound. "They see themselves in me, Dad," she said, scrolling through the hundreds of stories people had shared with her. All these people. It wasn't just about me and that horrible man. It was about all of them too. Julian nodded, his expression full of a deep fatherly pride that was worth more to her than all his billions. "Power is a tool, Amara. You can use it to build things or to break things. Miller used his to try and break you. Now you have a different kind of power. The question is, what are you going to build with it? That conversation was a turning point. Amara, with the guidance of her father and his formidable team, decided to embrace her new role. She agreed to one major interview with a respected journalist known for her integrity. On national television, Amara didn't speak with anger or bitterness. She spoke with a quiet, articulate grace that captivated the nation. She talked about her love for art, her excitement for her future, and how that moment of joy had been so easily twisted into one of fear. Officer Miller saw my clothes, my skin, and my sketchbook, and he built a story in his head about who I was, she said, looking directly into the camera. A story that had nothing to do with the truth. The real problem isn't just one bad officer. It's a system that allows that kind of story to have power. That's what needs to change. People shouldn't have to be the daughter of a billionaire to have their rights respected. Her words resonated deeply. She became the face of the reform movement her father's lawsuit was forcing into existence. She worked with the curriculum developers for the Amara Initiative, providing a perspective they could never get from a textbook. She insisted that the training include sessions led by psychologists and sociologists, focusing on the subtle, insidious nature of unconscious bias. Her sketchbook, once an object of suspicion, became a symbol of her resilience. A prestigious New York gallery offered to exhibit her drawings. The centerpiece of the exhibit was a new, large-scale charcoal piece she had created. It was a stunningly detailed rendering of the JFK departures board, but instead of flight numbers and destinations, each line contained a fragment of the stories people had sent her. Pulled over for no reason, followed in a store, denied a promotion, told I don't belong. It was a powerful, heartbreaking mosaic of 1,000 quiet injustices. The exhibit sold out, and Amara donated the entire proceeds to a non-profit that provided legal aid to victims of discrimination. She did go to RISD, not just for the summer program, but as a full-time undergraduate student the following year, having received a merit-based scholarship that had nothing to do with her father's name. She arrived not as the girl who stepped off a private jet, but as Amara Jenkins, a gifted artist and a powerful young woman who had faced down ugliness and had chosen to create beauty and change in its wake. She had learned a harsh lesson that day at the airport. The world held a casual cruelty she had never fully understood. But she had also learned a more important one, that one person, armed with the truth and the courage to speak it, could force that world to become just a little bit better. Her father had landed his jet to save her, but in the end, she was the one who was truly taking flight. Years, like the steady accumulation of paint on a canvas, add layers of depth and texture to the past. The sharp, painful memory of that afternoon at JFK did not fade for Amara. Instead, it transformed. It became the foundational layer of her life's masterpiece, a dark underpainting from which vibrant, meaningful colors would eventually emerge. The world, with its relentless news cycles, moved on, but the changes wrought by that single, brutal abuse of power continued to ripple outward, shaping institutions and lives in ways both seen and unseen. The most visible of these changes was the federal program that bore her name. The Amara Initiative was not just another stale PowerPoint presentation delivered in a stuffy conference room. Julian Jenkins had ensured it was funded, developed, and implemented with the same ruthless efficiency he applied to his tech ventures. Amara herself was its soul. In the early days, she sat in sterile boardrooms with high-ranking TSA officials and curriculum designers, a lone artist in a sea of bureaucrats. They expected a figurehead, a victim whose story they could sanitize for a training manual. They got an architect. "You have a module here called Identifying Suspicious Behavior," she said in one meeting, pointing to a draft document. "The problem is that the definition of suspicious is filtered through the officer's personal biases. Miller saw my hoodie, my sketchbook, and the color of my skin, and his brain manufactured suspicion where there was none. We have to train people to question their own internal narratives." The officials shifted uncomfortably. This was deeper than they had intended to go, but Amara was relentless. With the backing of her father's legal team, she pushed for the inclusion of sociologists and psychologists. The initiative evolved. It incorporated cutting-edge virtual reality training. New recruits were placed in a simulated airport terminal. They would stand in Officer Miller's virtual shoes, watching a young black woman approach the gate. They would feel the subtle, programmed prompts of their own unconscious bias, a flicker of judgment at her clothes, a dismissive thought about her art. The simulation would then show them the devastating emotional and professional fallout of their potential actions. They saw the scene from Amara's perspective, the world growing loud and threatening, the feeling of being publicly shamed. They experienced the viral video, the public outcry, the termination hearings. It was visceral, uncomfortable, and profoundly effective. A young recruit named David, fresh out of training in Omaha, went through the simulation. He came out shaken. "I always thought I'd be the hero," he confessed to his instructor. "But in the sim, for a second I felt that flicker of annoyance, that urge to just put her in her place. I get it now. The power, it's a weight, not a weapon." That was the initiative's true purpose, not just to teach rules, but to instill empathy. And the man tasked with overseeing its national rollout was former Supervisor Thorne. His was a special kind of penance. For the first 2 years, he performed his duties with a resentful, grim obedience. He was a ghost haunting the agency he once felt proud of, his demotion a constant, visible brand of his failure. He spent his days in endless meetings, reviewing the very footage that sealed his fate, his own inaction playing on a loop. He never reached out to Amara. Shame was a wall too high to climb. But slowly, something shifted. In city after city, he saw the small changes. He heard recruits like David talking not about control, but about responsibility. The work, which began as a punishment, became a quiet, reluctant mission. He would never undo his failure on that day, but he could spend the rest of his career trying to prevent another man from making the same mistake. It wasn't redemption, but it was the closest he would ever get. While the system was being slowly reshaped, Amara was building a world of her own. She graduated from RISD with high honors, her name already known in the art world not just for her story, but for her breathtaking talent. Her first solo gallery exhibition in Chelsea was titled Gate 3B, a direct confrontation with her past. The collection was not about victimhood, it was about perception. One massive canvas, the uniform, was a photorealistic painting of Miller's chest, the badge and name tag rendered in painstaking detail, but the face above it was a chaotic blur of angry abstract colors, representing the bias that had obscured his humanity. Another piece, the sketchbook, was an installation of dozens of her drawings suspended in midair, each one lit to show its intricate beauty, reclaiming the art he had tried to defile. Critics hailed it as a triumph of resilience, a transformation of trauma into transcendent art. With the profits from the show and a significant endowment from her father, she officially launched the Jenkins Foundation for Art and Justice. She wasn't content to just write checks. She sought out young, marginalized artists, the kinds of kids who might be profiled in an airport, whose talent was in danger of being stifled by a world that judged them before they ever picked up a brush. One such artist was a 17-year-old boy from the Bronx named Marcus, a brilliant graffiti artist whose work was legally confined to a few community-sanctioned walls. He dreamed of becoming a graphic designer, but his portfolio was on brick and concrete, not paper. The foundation gave him a grant, not just for art school, but for the tools he needed: a powerful computer, a digital drawing tablet, and mentorship. The mentor was Amara herself. She met with him in his neighborhood, watching him work on a vibrant mural. "They see this," Marcus said, gesturing to his art, "and they see a crime. They don't see the color theory, the composition, the hours of practice." "I know," Amara said softly, her mind flashing back to Miller's sneer. "He called my drawings gang signs. Your job isn't to convince the Millers of the world. They'll never see it. Your job is to make your art so powerful that they become irrelevant." She helped him build his portfolio, guiding his raw talent into a disciplined craft. When he was accepted into the Pratt Institute, Amara felt a joy as pure and profound as any she had felt for her own success. She was using her power to open the gates for others, ensuring their dreams had a chance to board. The ghosts of Concourse B had their own destinies to live out. Brenda, the American Airlines gate agent, found that her firing for gross misconduct in customer relations made her virtually unemployable in the travel industry. She ended up working in a vast, impersonal call center for a credit card company, spending 8 hours a day being yelled at by strangers for declined charges and late fees. She, who had reveled in her small measure of authority, now had none. She had to be polite, obsequious, and apologetic to people who treated her with the same casual disdain she had once shown Amara. She never connected the dots, never saw the karmic justice. In her mind, she was the victim, a casualty of a billionaire's overreaction. The fate of Officer Miller was darker. He lost his home. His wife, tired of being married to a public disgrace, left him. He drifted through a series of dead-end security jobs, each one more demeaning than the last. He ended up on the overnight shift at a frozen fish distribution warehouse in Elizabeth, New Jersey. His job was to walk the perimeter of a vast, humming, freezing building, checking locks and watching for ghosts. He was bitter, a man pickled in his own resentment. He spent his long, lonely nights scrolling through conspiracy websites on his phone, convinced that the world had conspired against him. One night, shivering in the pre-dawn chill, he saw a news alert on his phone. It was a story about the Jenkins Foundation for Art and Justice, celebrating its 5th anniversary. There was a picture of Amara, poised and smiling, standing next to a gifted young artist. The headline read, "Amara Jenkins, turning injustice into inspiration." Miller hurled his phone against the concrete wall of the warehouse, shattering the screen. "It's not fair," he screamed into the empty, frozen air. "I was just doing my job." But there was no one to hear him but the humming freezers guarding their silent, frozen cargo. His rage was as impotent and as cold as the world he now inhabited. Nearly a decade after the incident, Amara found herself back at JFK. She was flying to London, where the Tate Modern was hosting a retrospective of her early work. The airport was an entirely different place. Terminal 4 had been redesigned, filled with light, art installations, and open spaces. The security checkpoint was still imposing, but the process felt less adversarial. She watched a young TSA agent patiently explain the liquids rule to a flustered tourist, his tone helpful, not accusatory. She saw the small plaques at every station, reminding employees of the core tenets of the Amara Initiative: respect, de-escalation, and impartiality. Her flight was delayed. She settled into a seat at a cafe overlooking the tarmac. She pulled out a new sketchbook, a gift from her father, its leather even softer than the original, and began to draw. A woman who had been clearing the adjacent table paused, her eyes fixed on Amara. "I'm sorry to bother you," the woman said, her voice hesitant. She was older now, her face lined with a kindness Amara recognized instantly. "You're Amara Jenkins. I was here 10 years ago. My name is Eleanor. I was in line for that flight to Providence." Amara put down her pencil, her heart giving a jolt. She remembered the woman's face, the one person who had tried to speak up for her. "I remember you," Amara said, her voice thick with emotion. "You tried to help me." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't do enough. I let him shout me down. I've felt guilty about that for years, but I wanted to tell you, I'm a teacher, and every year, when I teach my students about civics and courage, I tell them your story. I tell them about the girl with the sketchbook, and I tell them about my own failure to be braver. You've taught more people than you can ever imagine." They spoke for a few more minutes, two strangers bound by a shared moment of ugliness that had, in its own way, blossomed into something beautiful. After Eleanor left, Amara sat for a long time, the sketchbook forgotten on her lap. Her father's dramatic arrival in his jet had been the moment of rescue, the thunderclap of karma. But this quiet conversation, the story of a teacher sharing a lesson of courage, the sight of a TSA agent showing kindness, This was the echo. This was the justice that truly mattered. It wasn't a single explosive event. It was a million tiny changes in the hearts of ordinary people. Her flight was finally called. As Amara walked towards her gate, she felt a profound sense of peace. She had not asked for the battle that found her that day, but she had fought it. And in winning, she hadn't just saved herself, she had helped redraw the map for so many others. She was no longer the girl who was told she didn't belong. She was the woman who had helped build a world where more people did. That was the story of Amara Jenkins, a young woman whose talent and spirit refused to be extinguished by prejudice and an abuse of power. It's a powerful reminder that while injustice can strike in the most ordinary of places, the demand for accountability can move mountains, or in this case, ground an entire airport's operations. The karma that found Officer Miller wasn't just about him losing his job. It was about the system itself being forced to change, ensuring his brand of petty tyranny would be far less likely to ever happen again. Amara's story shows us that true strength isn't just about weathering the storm, but about using its energy to reshape the landscape for the better. What did you think of Julian's response? Was it the perfect act of a protective father, or did it show a different kind of power at play? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If stories of justice, resilience, and powerful karma resonate with you, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to the channel for more unforgettable real-life dramas. Thank you for listening.